Tonight in Greater Boston, how officials and locals are scrambling to help dozens of migrants who unexpectedly arrived yesterday on Martha's Vineyard, and the message Florida's governor is trying to send by transporting them there. We'll hear from our reporter on the Vineyard and the state senator. Then Republican candidate for Attorney General Jay McMahon joins me on his bid to become the so-called people's lawyer. When news broke of two planes carrying about 50 migrants landing on Martha's Vineyard yesterday, it was Fox News that got the exclusive footage from the office of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who proudly took credit for sending those planes. It's part of what they call their relocation program, in which they send migrants to sanctuary destinations, and Florida's legislature even put aside $12 million of taxpayer money for the cause. Several migrants reported being lured onto the plane outside a shelter in Texas by a woman who promised them expedited work papers. Of course, this isn't the first such incident. Texas Governor Greg Abbott spent the better part of the summer sending buses of migrants to New York, Illinois, and D.C. And here in Massachusetts, yesterday's events were unexpected. No notice from DeSantis or anyone involved in the plan. Joined by Eve Zuckoff, a reporter with our Cape and Islands station CAI, who's been on the scene in Martha's Vineyard since yesterday, and State Senator Julian Cyr, who represents the Vineyard. Senator and Eve, thank you much for your time.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Eve, if I can start with you, let's start at the beginning. The proud instigator, as I said, obviously is DeSantis. But you're reporting on this recruiter that I just described, for lack of better expression, this woman, Perla. Can you tell us what some of the people you talked to said about her?
Yeah, what they told us is that when they crossed the border, they found themselves in Texas at a San Antonio shelter where they were approached by a woman. At first, migrants were hesitant to share her name, and kind of after talking to the second, third, bringing up this woman, several of them said, yeah, it was a woman. Her description was pretty consistent. Her name was Perla, and she offered them time staying in a hotel. She offered them food. And finally, she said, I'm going to get you expedited work papers when you get on this plane and you arrive in Boston. And so people who had very little options and choices in the homes that they were coming from, they jumped on this opportunity and they got on these planes.
Let me state the obvious. So the representations she made to them were untrue based upon what they told you.
Everything so far, this woman completely misled them. They didn't even land in Boston. They didn't know what Martha's Vineyard was.
And we don't know who she was sent by, who she was operating on behalf of. We don't know. In terms of the 40-some people who were there, staying with you, Eve, for a second, from what I understand, it's some families, a lot of individual men, and some kids as well. Is that an accurate description?
That's right. There are toddlers, one who had a fever last night. That's the only sick person here, per se. But the little kids have been playing, drawing on a big chalkboard. They've had tons of toys. And the men here have been playing dominoes. They've been playing soccer. They've been smoking. Really, it's what you would expect families and young men to do if they were stuck on a really long layover.
You know, Senator, my understanding is Governor DeSantis is going to be very upset because the reception, from what I understand from afar, has been quite warm from the business infrastructure, the political infrastructure, individuals. What's your understanding of how the people and institutions of the Vineyard have received these people?
So here on Martha's Vineyard and across the region, right, we're in the business of welcoming people. And we also really believe, right, that you got to welcome people with dignity and respect. You know, as you said, there was no advance notice of this, but, you know, the island community with emergency management, the sheriff's office, and community services here, and a whole host of volunteers, the Red Cross, pulled together a shelter basically that we would have for a hurricane or a nor'easter, made that happen. So, you know, really, the islanders have rallied to really support and welcome these migrants who are in a very, you know, unfortunate situation and who appear to have been actually trafficked, you know, perhaps by resources from another state into Massachusetts.
Well, I was going to get to that a little bit later, but since you used the term, the former Secretary of Public Safety, Andrea Cabral, was on our radio show today, as was Eve, by the way. And what Andrea Cabral said, she looked up the federal, not trafficking statute, but false imprisonment statute, and read it, and said she believed, based upon the deceptive representations, as Eve described from this woman, Perla, and the consent to go, and I use the term consent in quotes, because of those untrue representations, that false imprisonment had happened. Is anybody in your world, Attorney General, Governor, legislatures, any local DAs, is anybody talking about possibly bringing criminal charges against somebody here? Perla, Governor DeSantis, somebody?
So, first, we're focused on making sure that,
of course,
these migrant families have a roof over their head and all that. But really, this raises very significant concerns and questions and legal considerations as well. I mean, this was a cruel ruse that manipulated these vulnerable families for political gain, and capitalizing this in the most cynical way. Look, this isn't about helping, border communities that are having a capacity problem. This isn't about helping these families. This is about a political stunt for political gain, and it's just disgusting.
Eve, how are they doing? I know you've spoken to a decent number. How do they feel about the reception? How did they feel about the first night? How are they doing?
That's the thing. I spoke earlier this afternoon with two men who I had talked to yesterday also. And yesterday they were just kind of retelling the story of how they got here. By this afternoon, they made a point of saying they are so grateful to the people of Massachusetts. They didn't know what Massachusetts was not too long ago. And they have just been met with food, with clothing, with everything they can need. I mean, it's moving beyond basic necessities. And now it's like, can we get headphones here? Can we get things that make this stay a little bit more enjoyable?
Despite the hospitality and the empathy, Senator, it seems to me that there's a limited ability of the Vineyard infrastructure, to use the term again, to provide more than temporary space for them. And obviously jobs are non-existent in the winter, not to mention the cost of housing. So what are state and local officials talking about as next steps once this initial phase comes to an end?
I mean, absolutely right. There's a capacity challenge that we have, even with a shelter, currently has very limited bathrooms, only one shower. So this is not sort of sustainable, maybe sustainable for another day or two. I expect we'll have news soon, from the state, who's been spending the whole day and really since yesterday, marshaling resources and figuring out, how do we help these families and also potentially others that are coming. There's a whole swirl of rumors of potentially other either buses that may be coming to Massachusetts. Look, we have a playbook on this in the Patrick administration. Massachusetts welcomed unaccompanied minors to Massachusetts and utilized Joint Base Cape Cod to do that. We may see that playbook dusted off, so I expect you'll hear more on that soon.
So what kind of time frame, Senator, are you talking about, or are you talking about?
We're talking about a matter of days. I think that given the number of people, given the current shelter capacity we have here, I think also we need to anticipate, unfortunately, that another plane could come. Right? I don't think we. I think we need to anticipate that, and local officials here have anticipated that, and I think unfortunately we'll continue to do so. For some time, just given the really cruel, unexpected nature of this political stunt at the expense of these vulnerable migrants.
Eve, do you have any insight on this whole question about whether or not this is just the first of more? I mean, from what I understand, I'm not sure if it was your reporting or not. I heard some of the people who were on the plane talked about there had been others, and at least some of them had an expectation what the senator is predicting would come true, that this was just round one. Do you have any insight?
This has been the stuff of rumors all day here on the grounds. I mean, really the focus has just been, okay, it's another mealtime. Okay, there's a kid whose fever, really maybe she should get checked out. So not here, we don't know, but it's rumors every hour about that.
And Eve, I should have asked you this earlier when I asked you to describe the demographic, for lack of a better expression. The vast majority of this 43 or whatever the number is are from Venezuela. Is that not correct?
That's correct. Most of them at least lived in Venezuela. I talked to one man who's originally Colombian. There seems to be one outlier woman who's from Peru. Her name is Jessica. And all of them speak Spanish, and almost exclusively Spanish from who I've spoken with so far.
You know, it's interesting also that when you come from Venezuela, people like DeSantis are amongst the most vocal critics of the government under Maduro there. But when then people leave, they're to be made an example. I want to seize, Senator, on the word that you've used twice. I don't know if you ever read the book by the writer in The Atlantic called Cruelty is the Point. And it was about Donald Trump and Trumpism. Cruelty seems to me to be the point. Is it, I mean, politician to politician, not you to me, you to DeSantis. What do you say to what would you say to Governor DeSantis?
I mean, I think regrettably, you're right, Jim. And we've seen these fundamentally racist tactics and xenophobic tactics used time and again. And they go back a while. I think in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, right? Segregationists in the South tricked Black families into relocating to the North. 96 families ended up in Hyannis, right? The whole point, the aim of the segregationists was to make the white Northern liberals look like hypocrites. Well, on Cape Cod and Hyannis, we welcomed those 96 families. We got them housing. We settled them. They became part of our community. They're Cape Codders today. This is just the worst of American politics. And it's just really unfortunate. It's just really discouraging. This is not who we are in Massachusetts. You're seeing, Democrats, Republicans, all of us responding in a bipartisan, compassionate way, at least with the bigger Polito administration, certainly our partners in Congress, our senators, Congressman Keating, Dylan Fernandez and I, all of us, right, working in a very collaborative fashion. We really have to reject this kind of politics. That is not who we are as Cape Codders and Islanders. That's not who we are as Americans.
Senator Cyr, good luck with your work. Eve Zuckoff, your reporting has been terrific. Great to have you both. Thanks so much.
Take care.
As the senator just mentioned, this week's events are reminiscent of a very similar scene here in Massachusetts in the early 1960s, one that doesn't get a whole lot of attention in the history books. At the height of the civil rights movement and in retaliation for an effort to integrate Greyhound buses, Southern segregationists gave Black residents one-way bus tickets to communities in the North. As Gabriella Emanuel explains, they became known as the Reverse Freedom Riders.
This is me and my mom.
Betty Williams was 18, the second oldest of 13 kids, when Southern segregationists sent her family north with false promises of jobs, housing, a better life. It was 1962, and her mother was dressed to meet President Kennedy.
She was actually told that the Kennedy was going to meet her wherever she was dropped off in Hyannis. She was thinking that they was going to be there.
3 days after leaving Little Rock, Arkansas, their Greyhound bus arrived in Hyannis, not far from the Kennedy family's summer compound. President Kennedy was not there to meet the bus, but Margaret Mosley was.
Most of the people who came had only a shopping bag with perhaps one change of clothing, no money, knowing nobody. It was one of the most inhuman things that I have ever seen.
A longtime civil rights activist, Mosley knew that the people on board, the so-called Reverse Freedom Rides, were pawns in a segregationist game.
The Northern Liberals and the NAACP, Urban League, and people like that especially, they have been crying the sing-song in behalf of the Negroes throughout the nation. And of course, now when it comes time for them to put up or shut up, they have shut up.
About 200 African Americans were given one-way bus tickets north. Nearly half of them ended up in Hyannis. They were housed for a time at Otis Air Force Base.
As I drove one family up one evening, the young son in the family asked me, "Where are the cotton fields?" I said, "We have no cotton fields here." He said, "Well, what am I going to do to find employment? I can chop cotton. I don't know how to do anything else."
We didn't really have anything. We just had our clothing. We didn't have furniture and stuff like that we can bring here.
Like many of those sent to Hyannis, the Williams family ultimately moved to Boston in search of work. Things they'd never experienced before started to define their lives. Drugs, jail, neighbors who didn't know or care about them. And then there were things they were familiar with, racism. In Boston, some of the Williams children experienced the worst of school busing.
But the people from Arkansas that sent us from the south to the north, I have no anger in my heart against them. I don't want no hatred to live in my heart nowhere. I don't have no room for that. So I just keep moving forward.
Shaped by history, her family's and the country's.
That was Gabriella Emanuel reporting. You can find more information about the Reverse Freedom Riders on our website, gbhnews.org. Next up, the race for Attorney General. Earlier this week, we spoke with the Democrats' nominee, former Boston City Councilor Andrea Campbell. And today, I'm joined by the Republican candidate, Jay McMahon, a trial attorney and former military police officer. He ran for AG as well in 2018. Jay McMahon, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. We just did a segment with a senator from the Cape and Islands and a reporter from a sister station about the migrants that were shipped to Martha's Vineyard, apparently based on their testimony upon misrepresentations that were told to them. What's your reaction to what's happening on the Vineyard?
I'll tell you, my heart goes out to everybody involved, to the migrants. They didn't select to be there. They probably didn't even know they were going there. I don't like how this is all playing out. Jim, all I can tell you, it seems to be the outflow from a failed policy on the south border by the federal government. Now, granted, these governments, the governors of these states in particular in Texas, are sending them all over the country. I've seen it in D.C., New York, and of course now here in Martha's Vineyard. I guess they're trying to send a message to the rest of the country with respect to the failed policies on the border.
Do you support what Governor DeSantis did? He's proudly claiming credit for this. Do you support what he's doing?
I don't, because it's adversely affecting Massachusetts.
Okay. I went to your website, and you have scores of representations of what you would do while you're running, promises of what you do when you're Attorney General. I randomly picked a handful of them. I'm going to put them up, and then you'll explain to us a little bit of what you mean. The first one is, I will keep you safe from renegade mobs who destroy our cities. What renegade mobs are destroying our cities in Massachusetts?
Jim, as you recall, in the spring of 2020, following the death of George Floyd, there was mob violence all over the country in several major cities, Boston being one of them. And it was clear when I was watching the program, when I was watching the news footage of the mobs and the violence that was happening, how our police officers were being injured, how our police cruisers were being set on fire. And watching that, initially, before that had happened, I was almost like probably most Americans at the death of George Floyd. The optics were terrible as to how he died.
But then what?
Well, and then all of a sudden, here we are in Massachusetts. There's been no deaths in police custody in Massachusetts in over a generation, or in New England for that matter.
But if I may, I didn't see, I read every single one of your promises. I didn't read you say, and I'm going to make sure that I keep you safe from police officers who were videoed at those demonstrations driving a car into a protester and bragging about it. Did that trouble you?
It does, Jim, tremendously.
Why didn't you say it?
Well, Jim, I think it goes without saying that anybody who breaks the law, including road police officers, will suffer the same penalty and the same prosecution as anyone else.
Okay, let me go to the next one, because I have a bunch of them. I will not push a political agenda by filing meritless government lawsuits. I assume that's shorthand for all the lawsuits that Maura Healey filed against Trump. Is that it?
Well, against the federal government? Yes, it is, Jim. I think there was a whole lot of wasted effort there. Her batting average was very low.
Excuse me, what percentage of those lawsuits did she win? Do you know?
She didn't win any.
She won 77, Jay, she won 77% of her lawsuits against Donald Trump.
Jim, not the one she initiated, the ones that she joined in.
Let's go to another. I'll stand with parents against school committees who insist on teaching our children critical race theory. Which districts in Massachusetts are teaching critical race theory?
Jim, what we've discovered is they won't call it that. They haven't called it that, well, they stopped calling it. They're calling it other things. Now, we're finding that parents, I mean, I'm getting calls all the time. We're finding that parents are discovering either from their children or when they're making some requests to the schools themselves, they are finding it in the curriculum, but under different names.
What is critical race? But you use the term critical race theory. What is critical race theory that you're objecting to? What is it?
Jim, it's the teaching that there's been, it's the teaching that one race has been victimized by another race. In essence, it goes back to, it goes all the way back to the beginning of this nation. And it's an attempt to rewrite history.
Well, actually, it's not that. I assume you know it's that some problems in this country are not the result of individual bias and racism, but systemic racism. And can you identify any of those districts that are teaching it by some other name?
Well, Jim,
can you?
I can't give you right here in this interview the specific districts, but I am hearing it from parents who are sending me emails, which I've been calling them back. And so there's an overwhelming amount of them, Jim.
Okay, let me go to the fourth one. Let me go to one more if I can, Jay McMahon. Some DAs have accepted whole categories of crimes that they will not prosecute. My office will step up and prosecute those crimes. There, I'm sure you're talking in particular about the 15, what she called minor offenses, Rachel Rollins said she'd not prosecute, correct?
That's right.
Well, the people of, do you know how...
And also, we had an issue with that in Berkshire County as well.
Right, but you know that 80% of the people in Suffolk County, people who you want to represent as Attorney General, 80% of them voted for Rachel Rollins, knowing exactly what she stood for. So why do you suggest that you know better than them? And also, as I'm sure you know, Jay, there was a report that was issued that showed that her policies reduced the recidivism rate in Suffolk County. Does that matter to you?
Jim, I'll tell you what about statistics that you need to know. That if the police are told the crimes are not going to be prosecuted, or in essence, the cases are dead on arrival, they don't get involved in the statistics. So if you're told not to arrest anyone for shoplifting or for pickpocketing or all the other lists of crimes, they're not being reported. Of course, it shows a
By the way, she has no power to say don't arrest. She said she won't prosecute. There'll be diversionary programs, those sort of things. You know.
As you know, Jim, if you're going to discourage the police officers and say we're not going to prosecute, what's the point of arresting?
Jay McMahon, you, I know from doing a debate with you and Maura Healey in 2018, you're pro-life. If you're the Attorney General and a lawsuit was filed, for example, challenging the protection of reproductive rights of women in the state that Governor Baker, a Republican, signed in July, would you defend the statute as the state's lawyer, or would you not?
Jim, I'm required to, and I would.
You're actually not required to. I'm sure you know there have been many attorneys general who've recused themselves from individual cases and have appointed other, or had the court appointed other people to represent the state when they felt in good conscience they could not. You know that, right?
Sure. Scott Harshberger has done that when he was the AG, when it came to gay marriage. And of course,
so would you do that? Would you still represent?
I'm not going to recuse myself in a situation that is part of the duties of the Attorney General's office to uphold the laws of the Commonwealth.
You know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember from our discussion in 2018. Are you, a number of your colleagues, Republican colleagues running for statewide office, are proud supporters of Donald Trump? Are you?
I supported Trump, and I didn't necessarily support him as a person. I'm not looking at that, but I did support his policies.
Did you vote for him in both elections?
I did vote for him,
Would you
yes.
vote for him in 2024 if he were to run again?
I don't know. I'd have to see who else was running. Jim, there's other candidates that may.
No, I meant if he was the Republican nominee. I'm sorry, Jay. Would you support him then?
Yes, I would, Jim.
You know, the thing that surprises me a bit about that, Jay, is I've read a lot about you, and I know you a little bit. You're a very strong supporter of law enforcement. You know as well as I that a handful of police officers lost their lives as a result of what happened on January 6th and the days after. And I think the conventional wisdom is January 6th happened because of the outgoing president of the United States. How do you reconcile voting for a man who allowed that to happen to people trying to protect our country and our capital?
Jim, as running for Attorney General, there's a lot of things I could talk about how I personally feel. But when I look at the evidence and I see news footage of Trump telling people not to go, not to engage in violence, think if you're looking at it by straight facts, I know one police officer died. It wasn't he was at the scene, but it was not as a result of that. I know one of the people who broke into the Capitol building was shot by a Capitol
other police officers did die in the follow-up. As you know, there were suicides and things. We only have a minute left, if I may. You probably, okay. I know you know, that I have asked Andrea Campbell on both my radio show and here if she would debate you. Her response was 3 times, we'll see. Subsequent to that, you put out a press release saying you'd like 7 debates, including one here, and we thank you for putting us on your list. Have you been in touch with the Campbell campaign to see if... Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off. First of all, I want to say that GBH has been very fair. Tough in debates, tough with questions, but that's the whole point of a debate. You ask the questions, we have to give you the answers.
I only have a few seconds. Have you reached out to the Campbell campaign to see if she will debate you?
Our campaign has, yes.
And?
We'll see, is the response we're getting.
Well, I should say to you, Jay, as you know, we invite you formally. We invited Andrea Campbell. We look forward to debate between the 2 nominees. We thank you for your time tonight, and we hope that debate happens soon.
I hope it happens soon on your show. Thank you, Jim.
Jay, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Jay McMahon.
All right.
That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Adam Riley and his panel will dig into the many political implications of Florida's governor sending dozens of migrants to the Vineyard, plus the debate over debates, or lack thereof, in the state's midterm races. That and more tomorrow at 7. I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.